Mandy here from Needles, Thread and Little Betty. Little Betty is around. She's actually curled up asleep on my bed at the moment, so no doubt she'll pop her head in a little while. So this is part 2 of the Dreamy Owl quilt. So if you've seen part 1, you'll know that I mainly talked about the quilt and the fabric, and the reason for doing this. And I kind of finished with cutting some of the fabric up according to the pattern and left it at that. Okay, so I've cut all the fabric out now that I need. However, there is still some more cutting to do because a lot of the fabric is cut into long strips. So it's strips of the width of the fabric at most of it's 2.5 inches wide. Okay, so you've got strips like this basically. And if you look, I'll just move the camera. If you look behind me on my design board, you can see all the different strips and the different colours for the fabric that needed to be cut into strips. So today what I'm going to do is just finish off on the last block of strips, because each of the strips are sewn together in a particular way of the pattern. So if you can see, they're all labelled, as I said last week. All the fabrics are labelled and they're all put together in a certain way. So there's 4 different designs of how they're put together, and you're cutting out 2 lots or sewing together 2 lots of each of the different designs. Okay, I got a bit carried away because I was sewing them all together, and then I remembered I haven't actually demonstrated the sewing together. So I'm just on the last lot now, and if you can see, the other lots are all on the board, and they're all sort of there's a little post-it on each one telling me which one it is. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off the last set. So with your long strips, the first 2 you just sew together normally down the length of the fabric. So that's the original width of the fabric, and in just one direction. And so the next one, which is the one I'm putting on now, again, it's to go down the length of the fabric. However, with this one, you sew it in the opposite direction. Okay, so with long strips like that, it's always best, if you're sewing them in strips together, to do them in opposite ways, because if you do it all in the same way, it tends to make the piece of fabric that you're making curve. Okay, and we want to avoid that. So for the last one, I've sewn from that direction, and I know which direction I've sewn it because in the next one I put pins in facing the way that I need to sew the next one down. I hope that makes sense. I'm waffling. Okay, so over to the machine. I'll just bring you a little bit nearer if I can. I've got my machine set at a stitch width of 1.8, so you just want it just slightly smaller than what you would averagely for sewing, which is usually around 2.5. You just make it a bit smaller because when you're doing patchwork, it just helps hold it together. So if things are kind of like moved or pulled around, it just prevents it from the stitches splitting open. Okay, so we're using this pattern, uses 1/4 inch seam allowance, like a lot of quilting patterns do. If you're making your own pattern, you can use what seam allowance you want, but you obviously always need to stick to the same seam allowance. What I've done, because I'm doing long strips, and I don't know if you can see it, see if I can bring you a bit nearer. Can't really bring you near. There's a little bit of yellow tape I've put here, and I've put that down on my 1/4 inch mark. So I've got a 1/4 inch mark on my machine, but because it's a long strip, just to sort of help guide it down, I've put a piece of tape down that 1/4 inch mark as well, just so it's just as a guidance to keep it straight. Okay, so I've used pins for this because the pins just hold it. With when you're doing straight lines and long strips, it needs to be very well as accurate as you can get it, and the pins just help to keep it all in line, help to keep the edges together. Sometimes clips, they kind of move around. Clips are brilliant for when you're doing the actual quilting yourself itself and holding it all together, but these are fine quilting pins, and they just hold it a little bit better, a little bit finer for this part. So I'm going to put my needle in, and for patchwork I'm just using a universal 70 needle. The yarn that I'm using it's a Dove Grey by Orifil, and I'm using that because if you use a neutral colour like a light grey or something, it kind of loses itself into the colours of the fabric, unless you're using something really dark black or something like that, which you're probably never going to see me do. You might do. Never say never. So I'm using that, and it's just your usual kind of 50 weight, but it's a nice thread. It's a good quality thread, so that will help keep the stitches together. So basically all we're doing is just, I'll take the first pin out, is just sewing that 1/4 of an inch seam line. And just remember that I've got my piece of tape just to help guide it, and just make sure that your edges are held together going along that marker. Nice and easy. This is a domestic sewing machine. It has been made with quilting in mind, but because it's a domestic sewing machine, the speeds are not as great as if you're sewing with something like an industrial or a Juki, something like that, which go extremely fast. Okay, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, we're not in a race. We're not on a deadline. And all the way to the end. And there you have your seam and the next one sewn on. So what we need to do is, with the next piece of fabric, we're just going to pin it to the end. You've got to make sure with this pattern, you need to make sure that they're all going in the design that you want. So if you look again at the board, I'll bring you up a little bit, you can see that each of the blocks that have pinned up there, you've got kind of like a pink, a grey, a purple, and then kind of like a mauve and a red on one, and each one is in a different pattern. Okay, so just make sure that you keep it all in line with that. So for this one, my first fabric is this top one, so I know not to sew the last one onto the end of that. Okay, so I'm going to pin this one down, right sides together. Make sure I've got it the right way round. I mean, some people don't pin at all, and it's entirely up to you. A lot of things I don't pin. I just sort of get on with it, really. But for this one, I am, because they're long strips, sometimes it's quite hard to keep them level. I am just going to pop a few pins in. So I had a look. What I wanted to do was put a link to this Dreamy Owl kit in the description, but when I had a look, I can't find anywhere that actually makes it anymore, and I think that's mainly because I've had it in the cupboard that long. So if you wanted to make this quilt, I think you're going to struggle to get certainly the pattern kit. Now you'll probably still be able to just move you away a minute. That's it. You'll probably still be able to get the fabrics. I mean the Tula Pink fabrics by Free Spirit. So you'll probably still be able to get those. So if you do want to make this specific quilt and you research and you can get hold of the fabrics, then if you drop me a message, I will let you know kind of like the measurements and things like that of each of the fabrics that you need to cut out. If that makes sense. I'll do my best to do it that way. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to actually, I don't think I'm allowed to download the pattern, but I can certainly give you some little ideas on what you need to cut out and all of that. Okay. If you do have, or you do find the pattern, let me know, and then I can add in it into the description. Okay. But regardless of that, it's just nice to sort of see the fabrics, get the techniques and the ways of putting the fabrics, etc., together. Okay. So I'm just putting my last strip under the machine, 1/4 inch seam allowance. The other thing with doing long strips, just keep your eye on your bobbin thread, because obviously each strip is the width of the fabric, so you're going to be using a lot of thread in one go. And what you don't want to do is get to the end, find out that your bobbins ran out halfway through, and then have to do it again, which did actually happen to me. I'm speaking from experience on one of the blocks. Okay. Nearly there. I didn't put as many pins in this time because time constraints, I guess. Which I guess is one of the key things for making mistakes. There we go. Nearly to the end. Now, once you've done each of these long blocks, which is again 4 fabrics in a certain sequence, you need to iron them. Okay. So what I do is, with the seams at the back, I always iron them in the same direction. It doesn't matter which direction, but whatever direction you're using, keep that consistent with the flow of the quilt. It just stops bulkiness at the back of the quilt top. Okay, so I'm going to pull you over to the ironing board while I do this. I'll try and move the camera My son bought me, let's move the chair out of the way. My son bought me this new gadget for the camera to help me move it around, and it's really good actually. It means that I don't have to stop and start so much. Okay. So I've got my iron set up. Now I just want to check which direction. So this is the last one of these. So the direction goes away from the pink. The pink is actually the last one in the pattern. Just iron it. Nice hot iron. I think I'm running out of water for that one. I'll try and keep that cupboard door shut, because behind these doors are, I was going to say all my crafting supplies, but that's not true. There's a lot of my crafting supplies behind these doors. However, it's not the neatest place to look. It's okay for me because I know where everything is. Well, mostly, not always. But they're ideal because it's sliding doors, and I explained this in the previous video. It's ideal because my husband made me this design board, and a design board is perfect for if we'll use quilting as an example. If you're working out a pattern or displaying it before you sew your blocks together, you can just pop them on here and just stand back and look at it, and you can leave them on here for a few days if you want to, and just keep, because sometimes you can put the pattern out and then you can think actually that colour doesn't go next to that colour, etc, etc. And I know a lot of people probably don't have the area to put a design board, and often use the floor to put it out, which is absolutely fine. But the floor's not really somewhere where you can just leave it and keep coming back to it. Not unless you've got a room that you don't use very often. Right, so that's nice and ironed, and I've just used a bit of starch spray just to help keep it a bit crispy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is pin this, it's that way round, on here with my number 4, so I know which order they go in. Okay, so with a design board, you don't need to use pins. You can just, it will stick, because what it's made from is polystyrene, and it's got like a thin layer of wadding over the top, so fabric sticks to it. However, because I'm doing one on top of the other, just for pinning them out, just so I know which way they go in the design, I've popped a pin in. But that's fine too, because as I said, it's a thin layer of wadding on top of polystyrene, so it's perfect for either just hanging your fabric on or pinning fabric too. Okay, so I'm going to come back around here, and what I'll need is the first set of blocks, which is number 1, these ones. And I'll just push you away a little bit. There you go. As you can see, I'm still getting used to it. But thank you to my son Carl and his fiance Alex for getting me there. So what I'm going to do now is the next step, which is the blocks of stripes need to be cut into segments. Okay. So this first one, I need to cut 30, I think it's 32 segments of 2.5 by 8.5. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to quickly swap you round so you can see me cut this out. And then I will be doing the same for the other blocks, but we'll talk about this block first. All right. See you in a second. So I'm back now, ready to cut these fabric strips into the segments, and remembering that they're 8.5 times 2.5. So what I've done is I've got my square ruler. I mentioned this in the last video in part 1 of this tutorial, and I'm using this one because it's a 12-inch maximum, and obviously with it being 8.5 by 2.5, this fits perfectly. These kind of grip as well, so they don't slip around when you cut in, so it's perfect really. So all I need to do with this is line it up to get a straight edge first. I'm going to line the knot to the edge of the, just bring it in a little bit, because what we want to do is just straighten off that first edge. You've got your black lines along, and they kind of indicate sort of like the edges of the fabric as well. So you just want to make sure it's in a square. Okay, so I've got my rotary cutter. If you remember, this ruler's got the slots that your rotary cutter fits into. I'm just going to put it in the knot all the way along the first one, and what that does is that just takes the edge off, so you've now got a nice straight edge, and then I can start measuring the segments that I want. So what I'm going to do is line that edge up on the knot, move 2.5 inches along from the knot, from the edge, rotary cutter in, and all the way along. Another 2.5 inches, that will take me up to 5, rotary cutter in, all the way along. So from 5, another 2.5 takes me to 7.5, rotary cutter in, all the way along. And another 2.5 on top of that takes me to 10, all the way along. Okay. With these rulers, you can do more than one layer at a time, but for demonstration purposes, I'll just do it like this. And I'm not in any hurry anyway. And if you can see, I've got those 4 of the sections already. I need 32 of these from the strips from number 1, 2, 3 and 4. And if you remember, there were 2 lots of fabric strips in each of 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I will need 32 from both the sets. Okay, so there's the first 4 done. And then moving on to do the next 4. Now when it comes to, we know that they're 2.5 inch wide. When it comes to them making sure that 8.5 inches long, I will just measure them up and cut them separately afterwards. Now you can do it all in one long piece, but because this is a long piece, the width of the fabric, it's a matter of measuring up both sides, so it's just quicker and easier, I think, to do it this way, but you do it whichever way you want to do. As I've said before, I'm not in any rush, I've got no time limit, I can just take my time and enjoy it. Okay, so let's just move you up again. You might notice it's a little bit darker now. That's because when I was coming back to you before in a minute after I'd sewing the fabrics, I did, and I did the video fine, no problem. Just gone to edit it, realised that half of it I was on my side, and that's because of me getting used to this new camera stand where I'm moving it up and down. So I scrapped that part and I've done it again. So we're coming to the end of part 2 now of this tutorial for the Dreamy Owl quilt. And so next time in part 3, what we're going to do is, I've got all these little blocks and I've got the rest of the fabric. Some were cut into triangles. I've got all of that, and it's about putting the blocks together. Once I've put all the blocks together, created all the blocks, we can then look at sewing the blocks to make that quilt top. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. Give me a thumbs up if you've liked what you see. Think about subscribing. If you subscribe, you can press the alert button, and then it will tell you when the next part of the videos are. If you do them in a series, it's easier to find then. And they will be, once I start doing more, I will be listing them under the series. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks for part 3. Take care.